Well, I wrote another chapter of my book. This one concerns Dominick Black and his ordeal. I have spent less time with this one, so it's not nearly as polished, but it gives you a pretty clear idea about where I'm going with it. So, like the other chapter, tell me what you think. Hello out there. I am trying to get through.
With his powerful brainwaves cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnny Walker Dread to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's the Johnny Walker Dread Show.
Dominick's ordeal. At a tire store in Kenosha, Dominick Black waited for new treads to be installed on his car. All week he had been a nervous wreck as the jury in Kyle's trial took its sweet time deliberating over the evidence. As the young man who provided the rifle to Kyle, although his description of what that entailed differs somewhat from Kyle's, Dominick faced serious charges of his own that could land him in prison for over a decade. And those wanting Kyle convicted would have been perfectly fine with that. The tire store employees and even some customers recognized the young man who had nervously testified at Kyle's trial, but none said a word to him. In the customer waiting room, the TV monitor broadcasted Fox News all day in much the same fashion as tire stores all over the country. Dominick knew that the verdict would come any day now, but he wasn't expecting it at that time. Still, he routinely glanced at the screen, sucked in by the occasional clickbait headline. With scant warning, Fox News suddenly switched its coverage to Court TV, announcing that the jury had reached a verdict. Dominick hurriedly texted his mother to turn on the news. One by one, the verdicts were read aloud to a nation that had waited for an eternity, or so it seemed, for this moment. After the last verdict, the tire store erupted in applause, with many of the workers stopping by to congratulate him on his victory. Much like Kyle, Dominick felt his knees buckle. The trial had taken Dominick for a grueling ride. Caught between the proverbial rock and a hard place, Dominick had done little to deserve his predicament. Kyle was eager to join the group in protecting the Kendry's garage, and as his best friend, how could Dominick have turned him down? Much like the millions of partiers all over the world allowing their friends to drive drunk when they know they shouldn't, Dominick could not muster the nerve to tell his friend no. But it will be all right, he assured himself. As he figured it, they would go into Kenosha, ward off a few rioters, bandage a few cuts and bruises, and go home. What could go wrong? Joseph Rosenbaum showing up at a riot, that's what. Once Dominick discovered that Kyle had shot 3 men, his stomach turned to jelly. It was his gun, after all, and he had allowed Kyle to take it to the protest. As he drove a frightened and morose buddy to his mother's home in Illinois, they spoke nary a word to each other, absorbed in their own pools of anxiety. Like Kyle, Dominick saw the world closing in on him. Dreams of someday being a commercial pilot faded like a flashlight in a horror film. Once the smoke from Kyle's AR-15 cleared, Dominick found himself facing 2 counts, one for each dead person, of providing a rifle to one legally unable to possess it. The fact that the rifle killed 2 people only elevated the maximum sentence. Once the judge dismissed the gun charges against Kyle, however, many assumed that Dominick was largely home free. Not quite. Judge Schroeder threw out the minor in possession charge against Kyle late in the game, just before the jury deliberated. Why he chose to wait so long remains a mystery. Perhaps he was getting even with Binger over the Guy Smith fiasco, or perhaps he was just observing his own habit of indecisiveness that had frustrated myriad attorneys in past trials. Whatever the case, his late decision caused much anguish for a young man largely forgotten, although his anonymity was by design. While the rest of the country focused its attention on Kyle, Dominick tried his best to fly under the radar. Guided by the adults around him that better understood the need to free him from political intrigue, there would be no pudgy incidents for Dominick. While Kyle's mother and attorneys engaged in one right-wing interview after another, Dominick and his support group laid low and let Kyle soak up the ensuing vitriol. Kyle's acquittal no doubt infuriated Binger and Krause. While their long-suffering target danced away basking in a sea of idolatry, Dominick was left behind to fend for himself. The specter of Binger filing an appeal to overturn the judge's decision on the gun charge, and therefore offering the prosecution one last chance to exact on Dominick a dose of revenge for Kyle's acquittal, loomed large. Even if the Wisconsin Supreme Court of Appeals denied Binger's attempt to overturn the judge's decision, the long delay in retrieving a judgment would crimp his ability to attain gainful employment. He had a felony gun charge hanging over his head, after all. The delay would also mean abiding strict bail conditions, with the usual prohibitions such as avoiding contact with trial witnesses. In this case, one of those witnesses happened to be his best friend, Kyle. Many of Kyle's supporters had already turned on Dominick for his testimony that, as they saw it, smelled of treason. He had, after all, implied that Kyle had taken his gun without his permission. In a mindless diatribe worthy of TikTok, Tim Pool called Dominick a traitor and stated he hoped Dominick served a long prison term. Such criticism was completely unjustified. Calls for Dominick to protect his friend while on the stand largely came from Kyle's fan base driven emotionally into getting their patriotic hero acquitted. Dominick, lacking the chubby cheeks and heroic self-defense imagery, mattered little to them. But Dominick had not shot anyone that night. Kyle had. For Dominick to fall on the sword for Kyle would have been a miscarriage of justice beyond imagination. If he had helped sway the jury to acquit Kyle by implicating himself, he would have found himself sitting in a prison cell while his superstar friend, who did the actual shooting that had landed him in trouble in the first place, toured the celebrity circuit while basking in admiration to the shrieks of girls and fireworks. Careful examination of Dominick's testimony tells a different story than his detractors believed. While Dominick seemingly pointed a finger at Kyle for taking the gun without his permission, such an admission served Binger little purpose. Whether or not Kyle's possession of the rifle was legal had yet to be decided, but Binger hardly needed Dominick's testimony to convict Kyle on that misdemeanor. Rather, Binger wanted Dominick to tell the jury that Kyle had threatened a protester earlier in the evening. When asked directly, however, Dominick refused to go along, stating that he had seen no such thing. The stunned look on Binger's face betrayed his intentions. He was so surprised by the response that he even repeated the question. However, Dominick stuck to his guns.
You would point your gun at those people?
In the direction.
Did the defendant do that?
I am unaware.
You didn't see the defendant point his gun at those people?
No, I was looking at the construction site.
With that exchange, the prosecution experienced the first of many witnesses that would let them down. While Dominick's defense team had the prosecution by the cojones as far as the law was concerned, their emotional and practical need to draw the gun charge to a conclusion knocked the ball back into Binger's court. Such is the stuff of plea bargains, and Binger cooked up a doozy. He offered Dominick the sweetest deal imaginable, a civil infraction carrying only a modest fine. Like a Monday afternoon stripper scooping a dollar bill off the stage, Dominick accepted the plea. He would have been a fool to do otherwise. Not everyone was happy with Dominick for accepting the plea deal. Many wanted him to take a stand on principle given that, with the gun charge dismissed, the prosecution had no case. As they saw it, why should he claim no contest to breaking a law, no matter how inconsequential, when the language of 948.60 clearly favored him? Many saw the injustice of his conviction of an infraction, even if technically not a crime, in the face of Kyle's exoneration of all charges. But the peanut gallery had expressed such criticisms more on their own zest for serving Binger a healthy heaping of humility than any concern for Dominick's well-being. Dominick knew a good deal when he saw it, and understood that scrapping with the prosecution would not serve him well, even if he won. Much has been said about Binger's motives for offering such a deal. While many are cast in the language of evil plots to extort petty cash from a scared teen, much like everything associated with the Kenosha shootings, the truth is probably more sober. Binger could have appealed the judge's decision to throw out the gun charge, but weary from serving as the nation's judicial punching bag by both sides of the political aisle, Binger probably had little left in his tank to undertake such an ordeal, especially given that his main antagonist, Kyle Rittenhouse, had forever escaped his grasp. While Binger's handling of the trial proved that he was no slouch at the propaganda game, there, success comes down to the art of persuasion in legalese. In that arena, Binger would have served as Tokyo to the court's Godzilla. Binger likely wanted to end the case against Dominick as much as Dominick himself. He had offered Dominick a plea down to a misdemeanor earlier in the month. Such a compromise would have allowed Binger to go on record that he had held at least someone accountable for the shootings, but those close to Dominick convinced him to reject it. Although not a felony, even a misdemeanor gun charge would have all but eliminated Dominick's dream of being a commercial pilot. Much like a losing football team kicking a field goal to avoid a shutout, Binger combed through the Wisconsin statutes looking for something Dominick and his team would find palatable. He found it in 948.40, contributing to the delinquency of a child. Technically a misdemeanor, Binger reduced the charge down to a mere civil infraction akin to littering or jaywalking. Eager to make the case go away, Binger swallowed his pride and served the civil infraction to him with whipped cream and a cherry on top. With the final signing of court papers, Dominick breathed a sigh of relief. It was finally over. He had managed to escape the clutches of the Wisconsin judicial system without even a criminal record. With bail restrictions permanently lifted, he was now able to talk to anyone he wished. The first call he received was from someone he had missed sorely over the past year, and who wanted to catch up where they had left off before fate, in the form of Joseph Rosenbaum, had so cruelly intervened. It was Kyle Rittenhouse. And the two had a lot to talk about, but there would be plenty of time for that later. For now, a little World of Warcraft. Like my video, subscribe to my channel.